Hello and thanks for joining me. Well, I've had my Olympus system now for about 10 weeks and I know quite a few of you have been asking me how I get on with it. So I thought it was about time I did a full review. The reason I'm kitted out like this and coming to you from not far off the summit of a Snowdonia mountain is that it illustrates perfectly one of the main reasons that I chose this particular system. Now, I'm going to go into some detail about exactly why it suits my purposes. But before I do, I just want to say this. This is not a tech channel. This isn't really about reviewing gear. The only reason I'm going to talk about this for a few minutes is because I've had a lot of questions asking me how I'm getting on with it. So I'm going to cover how it works for me in these sort of locations, and that's probably the last you'll hear of me talk about it that much, because my channel is really about getting out and about and taking photographs in environments like this. This kit that I'm wearing at the moment is everything I take for when I'm vlogging and photographing. Now, you're watching me from an Osmo Pocket on my main tripod at the moment. Those are the only two things that I actually am not standing up in right now. This bag contains all my video gear and any other sundry bits and pieces that I need. And this tiny little holster and little pouch here with my filters in is everything I need for stills. I've got a cable release and a spare battery, a lens cloth. That's it. And I carry it on the belt of my backpack or at the front of me so that whenever I'm out and about I can get to the camera really easy. And that's really important to me. I've been taking some handhelds on the walk up here. If the camera had been in my backpack, I'd have been less inclined to take those images. So the key thing about this particular system is the size and weight. Let me tell you a bit more about it in detail. So what do I think of this camera? Well, the only way I can really answer that is to tell you how specifically it works for me personally. As I mentioned earlier, I bought it because I needed it to be extremely portable. My old system was getting to the point where I was going to need to buy some much better quality glass. And in order to do that, I was going to be carrying around a thick end of 2 or 3 kilos at least, and that's just the glass, let alone the body and the other bits of kit that you need. So that got me thinking long and hard about whether or not I should go down that road, and in the end I decided to go for this. What I've got on this is the 12-100 f4 Pro lens. Now that gives me an extremely useful zoom range for the sort of landscape photography that I do. So we're looking at about a full frame equivalent of 24-200, and that's the last time you'll hear me talk about full frame. I'm shooting from 12-100 millimeters. The key thing being that gives me a really flexible range in one lens. Now that wouldn't be much use to me if the lens was, shall we say, less than sharp. But I've been absolutely astounded at the quality of this lens. I've had no complaints about it whatsoever. It's weather sealed and the image stabilization in the lens works beautifully with the image stabilization in the body. Coming on to the image stabilization, the 5-axis stabilization in the body combined with the lens gives you approximately 6 stops, and to be honest with you, I don't need anything like that. I found that hand-holding cameras hasn't been too much of a problem. My old system that had almost no stabilization, but it is handy. There's no two ways about it. But if it didn't have it, I probably wouldn't have particularly been too concerned about it. The key thing for me with this is the absolutely rock-solid, rugged build quality. I'm renowned for not being very kind to my equipment. The camera that you're currently watching me on got dropped twice on the way up here. Amazingly, it still seems to work. So that's a bit of luck. But yeah, these get taken out to places where they're going to get rained on, they're going to get abused, left lying around on bits of rock and all sorts of things. So the build quality was absolutely critical. Now, image quality. Well, I've been extremely happy with it. And the comments and feedback that I've had on the images that I've taken since I switched over to this system have been by and large extremely positive. So I don't think there's any real issues around image quality whatsoever. We've all read about and we've all heard the arguments about whether or not 4/3 really lives up to the sort of quality you're obviously going to get from a full frame. I'm willing to bet that there are situations where this would be absolutely rubbish. The difference is I don't find myself in those situations pretty much ever. So as a landscape photographer out in areas like this or down on the coast and in blue hours at either end of the day, I've had absolutely no problems with it. So on that front, it's a big tick from me. It works beautifully. The features that it has are great. I found them really, really helpful already, and I'm sure that if I went to a system that didn't have them, I'd be thinking, oh no, if only I had my live comp and all that sort of thing. There's some very specific things built into this camera that work really well for landscapes. The first one obviously is the long exposure, where you've got a thing called live time. What that allows you to do is to use your shutter release, and I tend to use a cable release for that, to start an exposure, and then you can watch the exposure building up on the screen on the back. You also get your histogram on the screen at the back, and you see it gradually moving across to the right as you take the image. And when you've got what looks like the perfect exposure, you press the button again on your shutter release and the exposure stops. It makes 10-stop long exposures an absolute breeze. Now, I'm not going to go bonkers with them because I do like them. There are times when they're the right thing to do, but just because this makes them really easy doesn't mean that every image is going to be a 10-stop. But that aspect to the way this camera works for landscapes is brilliant. Really useful, and everybody I've shown it to have gone, wow, that's fabulous. So a big plus there. It's also got an extremely fast burst mode. Now you'd think for landscapes that wouldn't be super useful, but I used it in a video not long ago down on the coast, where I was able to take lots of images of waves to pick exactly the right one out of the set, up to 60 frames a second, provided your shutter speed obviously is fast enough to allow that. But a really, really useful feature. The Pro Capture mode with that allows you to have up to 35, let me say that again, up to 35 frames captured on a half shutter press. So at the point where you react to whatever it is you're trying to shoot, you've already got 35 frames in the buffer. So those will then get written to the card. So even if you're a bit slow on the full press of the shutter, hopefully one of those frames has caught whatever it is you're after. So the obvious application for landscape photographers, for the sort of photography that I do, is shooting big waves in storms. And I'm sure it's going to come in really useful for that. What other features are there of this camera? One thing that I really like about it, I really like the amount of information you get on the screen and with the electronic viewfinder. You've got levels for horizontal and vertical, you've got your histogram on the screen live. Also in the histogram, which is really useful, is a little section of green in the middle of it, which shows you the area of the histogram that relates to your either your focusing reticule or your metering reticule. And so you can see exactly where you're at with your exposure. I like the fact that you're looking at your exact exposure because it's all electronic. There's no guesswork around what the exposure is going to look like when you take the image. It's also got a good depth of field preview. One thing about the Micro Four Thirds, of course, is the fact that depth of field is much easier for landscapes because it's less difficult to get a long depth of field than it is with larger sensor cameras. So I'm really enjoying that. Now there is a counter argument that says you then struggle to get a soft background if you want to throw the background out of focus. I haven't found that. I've had no problems with that at all. It just requires you to use the equipment as skillfully as you can. So I guess to sum it all up, I would have to say that I really like this camera. It's doing me absolutely proud. It's brilliant that it's so handy, lightweight, flexible, powerful, great image quality, great features. I'm really pleased with it. The whole thing was a fraction of the price of one half decent full frame camera body, let alone some glass. You wouldn't have much change out of £5,000 by the time you've spent 2.5 on a body and bought 2 or 3 lenses, which you would need to get the sort of quality that I would want. So yes, there are compromises around this, but the main thing for me is the ease of carrying it. I've had absolutely no problem getting it up this mountain today. I'm sure it's going to be a constant companion with me for a very long time to come. If you're thinking about it and you're in two minds about Micro Four Thirds, all I can say is that my experience of it so far is that it makes absolutely zero difference to anything that matters. As far as a positive difference goes, it's lightweight, it's economical, it fits the bill for me. I think that's enough about gear. I'm going to leave it at that. As I said earlier, you won't hear me talking much about gear after this. So thank you ever so much for joining me again. Appreciate it as always. Oh, and if you haven't done it yet, why not subscribe now? Join me next time. Cheers.